Thanks. Okay. We're recording a little different this morning, so if you notice a different perspective, you're right. Okay. Psalm 69. Save me, O God, from the waters are come in unto my soul. I sink in deep mire, where there is no standing. I am come into deep waters, where the floods overflow me. I am weary of my crying, my throat is dried, mine eyes fail, while I wait for my God. They that hate me without a cause are more than the hairs of mine head. They would destroy me, being mine enemies wrongfully, are mighty. Then I restored that which I took not away. O God, thou knowest my foolishness, and my sins are not hid from thee. Let not them that wait on thee, O Lord God of hosts, be ashamed for my sake. Let not those that seek thee to be confounded for my sake, O God of Israel, because for thy sake I have borne reproach. Shame hath covered my face. I am become a stranger unto my brethren, and an alien unto my mother's children. For the zeal of thine house hath eaten me up, and the reproaches of them that reproach thee are fallen upon me. Romans 15. When I wept and chastened my soul with fasting, that was to my reproach. I made sackcloth also my garment, and I became a proverb to them. They that sit in the gate speak against me, and I was the song of the drunkards. But as for me, my prayer is unto thee. O Lord, in an acceptable time, O God, in the multitude of thy mercy, hear me. In the truth of my salvation, deliver me out of the mire, and let me not sink. Let me be delivered from them that hate me out of the deep waters. Let not the water flood over me, neither let the deep swallow me up. And let not the pit shut her mouth upon me. Hear me, O Lord, for thy loving kindness is good. Turn unto me according to the multitude of thy tender mercies, and hide not thy face from thy servant, for I am in trouble. Hear me speedily. Draw nigh unto my soul, and redeem it. Deliver me because of mine enemies. Thou hast known my reproach and my shame and my dishonor. Mine adversaries are all before thee. Reproach hath broken mine heart, and I am full of heaviness. And I looked for some to take pity, but there was none, and for comforters, but I found none. They gave me gall for my meat. In thy thirst they gave me vinegar to drink. Let their table become a snare before them, and that which should have been for their welfare, let it become a trap. Let their eyes be darkened, and they see not, and make thine loins continually to shake. Pour out thine indignation upon them, and let thy wrathful anger take hold of them. Let their habitation be desolate, and let none dwell in their tents. For they persecute him whom they have smitten, and they talk to the grief of those whom they have wounded. Add iniquity unto their iniquity, and let them not come into thy righteousness. Let them be blotted out of the book of the living, and not be written with the righteous. But I am poor and sorrowful. Let thy salvation, O God, set me up on high. Now I'll stop right there, and I'll just note the word but in 29. There's a change. Okay. And also, if I read Jonah, chapter 2, verse 1, then Jonah prayed unto the Lord his God out of the fish's belly, and said, I cried by reason of mine affliction unto the Lord, and he heard me out of the belly of hell. Cried I, and thou heardest my voice. For thou hast cast me into the deep, in the midst of the seas, and the floods compassed me about. All thy billows and thy waves passed over me. I'll stop right there, but what I wanted to show you was it's the same language of David's complaint in Psalm 69 historically. It's the same verbiage. Why? Well, we see here he's in hell. His body's in the fish, his soul's in hell. Well, prophetically, Psalm 69 is talking about what, Joyce? You recognize the verse, a couple verses? It's the crosswork, right? It's the crosswork. And that's David's complaint. When we've looked at, I didn't go any further than the but because it changes gears. towards his hope. Okay, you go from his agony to his hope. In the first three prophetic program utterances that we hear from the cross, they occur during the first 3 hours. And we can know that by studying the scriptures in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And what we read, what we see in those first three utterances is the going of the gospel to Israel in the first one. Forgive them, Father, for what? They know not what they do. And the second one is comfort and assurance to the little flock and the church in paradise, where the prisoners are. Remember what he says to the thief on the right? And then the third one we looked at last week is the refuge and provision to the remnant during Jacob's trouble in that great tribulation, that 3.5-year period. So there's comfort, refuge, and provision while you're still in the flesh on the earth, as far as the Lord's concerned, about his own. The first of the 9th hour statements are what we're going to look at here today, and they elucidate the details of the crosswork prophetically. The who, the what, the where, the when, the why. Historically, it's David's complaint and the great discouragement in that distress, historically. Prophetically, Christ is on the cross. It's identified by his utterance in that crosswork. If you'll take a look at Matthew 27:46, that's where we are. This first of these 9th hour statements. Matthew 27. Matthew 27. I mean, these statements aren't capricious. I mean, they're ordered by the scriptures telling us what hour, as in time, the process of time, him on the cross, in those 6 hours from 9 a.m. to 3 a.m., we hear what it is that's on his what? His mind. And what he wants to make known to those present. Remember how many believers are there that we know of? The 5 women and John. Remember that we looked at? Matthew chapter 27. 27. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is to say, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Now, the response to that in the crowd and the multitude around the cross, it says in 47, some of them that stood there when they heard that said, this man calleth for Elias. Well, you know, somebody's always got an opinion. We got a Friday night Bible study. And every once in a while, the heckler's there. And if he has an audience, he starts right up and he starts accusing Christians of all kind of things and how ridiculous the Bible is and how wrong it is and all that. And he speaks real loud wherever we sit. And so, you know, I don't respond to him. I did once. And of course, that was a half-hour rant and railing on me personally. Is embarrassing. And I say that because here's the crowd around him, and we're going to see what kind of activity's going on around him as he hung on the cross. But here, is that a scriptural response to what he said? Not at all. Can we know scripturally what's going on? We absolutely can, because that takes us to Psalms 22:1. Psalms 22:1. Psalms 22:1. So prophetically, he's just identified the scriptures that talk about the details of the cross, the who, what, where, when, and why. Okay? Psalms 22, verse 1. So as he hangs on the cross in the 9th hour, in time, we're winding down. Although the intensity of what's going on now in the 9th hour is incredible, beyond our comprehension. Note, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? So when he says that, where does he direct us to, believers? Not that somebody said that, some subjective opinion of what he's talking about. But we can know his mind because he goes right to Psalms 22. Jesus Christ, the son of Abraham, the son of who? David. David. This is David's complaint that we read in Psalm 69. Here we see David complaining. And as the psalm goes on, in great discouragement, in great distress, and he praises God in that distress on the cross of Calvary. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Why art thou so far from helping me and from the words of my roaring? So we have this one statement here, and what do we have scripturally, time past, prophetically? A volume of the details of that crosswork. Okay. In Psalms 22, 1 through 31. Okay. Psalms reveals both physical and a spiritual occurrences in that crosswork. In the first verse, we see distress. You see that the words of my roaring. You know how in agony somebody inarticulately just roars out? That's that. Look at verse 2. Oh my God, I cry in the daytime, but thou hearest not, and in the night season, and am not silent. But thou art holy, O thou that inhabitest the praises of Israel. My cries are not heard. Yet, in all of this, in this crosswork, do we defame God the Father at all? Does he? No. That's what he says there in verse 3. But thou art holy. This thing that happened on the cross of Calvary, it's pure. In Romans chapter 3, verse 22, which is in Matthew yet unrevealed, and that's the mystery, and that's the building of the church, the body of Christ. Embedded in that crosswork, we see that this was the only right way to sin. When Christ prays to forgive Israel, does he? Does the Father forgive Israel for 1 year and give him a renewed opportunity for repentance through the Holy Spirit? When Christ prays that he doesn't want to face these 6 hours on the cross of Calvary, does the Father say, okay, no? He says, if possible, but thy will be done. It wasn't possible to handle it in any other way. Romans 3:22 says, this is the right way to deal with sin according to the justice of God. This was the only way to deal with sin. This way, and he's holy in it. Okay? Verse 4, our fathers trusted in thee. They trusted, and thou didst deliver them. He's saying to the Father, you delivered God the Father. And he's saying about time past, remember, who's the fathers in Israel? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Those are the 3 fathers, right? And when they cried, did he deliver them? Yes. So why not deliver me? See, that's what he's saying. You delivered them, why not deliver me? If possible. You remember what he prays? In the Mount of Olives? Okay. They cried unto thee, those fathers, and were delivered. They trusted in thee and were not confounded. They didn't say, well, you know, like evangelicals today say, we wanted so-and-so to get better. Okay, but they didn't. But we don't know what God had planned. That's not what this is saying. This is saying he delivered them when they cried. Okay? Now so when they cried, you heard and delivered them. They weren't perplexed by you not delivering them. Okay? Verse 6 nails it. But I am as he hung on that cross, he knew what he was as a sacrifice. And no man. Now, up until the crosswork, he was called what? The Son of Man. Was he fully man? He's also God. Remember, God the Father tells Peter, this is the Son of God. And he says, only the Father. You know that only because of the Father and that he spoke it to you. He's the Son of Man. What's he saying on the cross of Calvary? I'm not the Son of Man any longer. I'm a worm. Why?
He's in hell.
And what's happened to him as a man? He's not in his what? Body. It's not in his body. Where's his body? Is his body down in hell? No, that's what you can see on the cross. Physically, that's what you can see on the cross. He's being dealt with by the justice of God in hell, in torments, while he hung on the cross. Okay? Take a look at, keep your finger there and look at Isaiah 66. Isaiah 66. In the prophetic purpose of God, you don't want to be on the left side of the cross. Where that other malefactor is, that other thief, you do not want to be on the left side. Why? Because this will be your future. Verse 23, and it came to pass that from one moon to another, from one Sabbath to another, shall all flesh come to worship before me, saith the Lord. And they shall go forth and look upon the carcasses of men that have transgressed against me, for their worm shall not die, neither shall their fire be quenched, and they shall be an abhorring unto all flesh. Look at Mark 9. Mark 9. Mark 9. A friend of mine, probably the only genius I ever knew, and genius, I don't know what that means. Unexplainable abilities, and it seems like he never, how did he learn that? And I'd shared the gospel with his sister who was in a mental institution, and he's furious with me. And he cited the wrath of God in the Bible. I don't know, I think he said 400, I wish I still had that letter, 486 times. And he says, I'll never, ever believe in a God as unmerciful as that. Not a biblical point of view, is it? Notice here in Mark 9, and the Lord repeats this. Notice, and if thy hand offend thee, verse 43, cut it off. It is better for thee to enter into life maimed than to have two hands to go into hell, into the fire that never shall be quenched. Is dying physically, the first death, okay, mean annihilation in the second death? No. The worm is the soul. That's a component part of your trichotomy, body, spirit, and soul. And he says, where the fire is not quenched. So what are you as a worm? A soul. Eternal. Never destroyed. We say destroyed. You can see that in the scriptures. But when we, like, say, you drive out west and there's pickup trucks and farm equipment all on the lawn around the house. And they're all rusty and they're all what? Destroyed. Does that mean they're not there? No, they're still there. They're destroyed. They don't work. And it's the same thing with the soul. It doesn't work. It's being punished. Note, verse 44, where their worm dieth not and the fire is not quenched. And if thy foot offend thee, cut it off. It is better for thee to enter halt into life than to having 2 feet to be cast into hell, into the fire that shall never be quenched, where their worm dieth not and the fire is not quenched. And if thy eye, what's he saying? It's better to be physically maimed than compromised by sin and not having dealt with sin the right way, okay, which is the ongoing gospel of Christ through the Bible. Notice verse 47, and if thy eye offend thee, pluck it out. It is better for thee to enter into the kingdom of God with one eye than having 2 eyes to be cast into hellfire, where their worm dieth not and the fire is not quenched. Verse 49, more information here. For every one shall be salted with fire, and every sacrifice salted shall be salted with salt. What does salt do?
Preserves.
That's what happens. That worm, that red maggot down in the fire that's not quenched, is preserved as a sacrifice to pay for sin with no ending. That's different with the cross of Calvary. These sacrifices are not able to pay the price to his justice. Not acceptable. There's only one way God dealt with sin, and it's through this sacrifice of the Son of Man in those 6 hours. Okay? So we're talking about hellfire that's not quenched and salted as a sacrifice, preserved as a sacrifice. Okay? In Matthew 27, verse 46, we said it's 3 p.m. daytime. Actually, it's 2 p.m., I'm sorry. 3 p.m., the crosswork is over. Take a look at Psalms 22 again, and look at verse 7 and 8. We're going to go the opposite this time. We're going to read what it says in Psalms, and then we're going to go to the narrative in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Notice, all they that see me laugh me to scorn. This is the activity around the cross. They shoot out the lip. They shake the head. He trusted on the Lord that he would deliver him. Let him deliver him, seeing he delighted in him. Okay, so what do we got going on here? Everybody around the cross is doing what? He's alone. Yep. Take a look at Mark 15. Mark 15. Mark 15, and if you look at 16. And the soldiers led him away into the hall called Praetorium, and they called together the whole band. And they clothed him with purple. That's what? The color of what? Royalty. And platted a crown of thorns. And they put a crown on him. Only it was a crown of thorns. Out of the 4 trees of Israel, what do you got?
Bramble.
This is bramble. This identifies the bramble, the thistle. What's bramble represent back there with Jotham's parable? Apostasy. So what are they putting on him? The apostates, right? The Gentiles, because of the apostates, are putting an apostate crown onto him. He's not the true God. Take a look at as it goes on here. It says, and he began to salute him. Hail, Mary said, mocking, King of the Jews. And they smote him on the head with a reed, and did spit upon him, bowing their knees, worshipped him. And when they had mocked him, they took off the purple from him and put his own clothes on him and led him out to crucify him. So, they scourged him. They put him in purple and a crown of thorns, a king of apostasy. That's what they're saying. They smote and they spit on him. They mocked him as they led him to Golgotha. Notice, it says, verse 21, and they compel one Simon, a Cyrenian who passed by, coming out of the country, the father of Alexander and Rufus, to bear his cross. And they bring him unto the place Golgotha, which is being interpreted the place of the skull. And they gave him, what do we call it that? We don't call it that, do we? Luke 23:33, we call it Calvary, don't we? We call it Calvary. Okay, and that's the only place that appears is in Luke 23:33. Notice, it says, and they gave him drink wine mingled with myrrh, and he received it not. And when they had crucified him, they parted his garments, casting lots upon them, what every man should take. These things are prophetically present in the scriptures. And it was the 3rd hour, and they crucified him. And the subscription of his accusation was written over, the King of the Jews. Yeah, he's the king of apostasy, not the true gods and God. And with him they crucified 2 thieves, the one on the right hand and the other on the left. So what we just read was the soldiers. That's the representatives of Rome. Okay, that would be the Gentiles. In the Old Testament, what are they called? What's a Gentile called in the Old Testament? Dog. I could be more explicit, but I won't. Take a look at verse 29.
Amen.
Yeah, we don't need to go into that. And they passed by, railed on him. And they that passed by railed on him. So as this crowd is moving and mingling, what's the point of view? Wagging their heads and saying, Ah, thou destroyest the temple and buildest it in 3 days. See the mock right there? Really? Look where you're at now. Look at your end. Okay, they think it's an end. They're throwing back his prophetic teaching, okay, about who he was as the Son of Man. Verse 30, save thyself and come down from the cross. If possible, Lord, do what? Take this cup from me, but thy will be done. So what's the temptation there? Could he come down from the cross? Is there anything he couldn't do on that cross? But what's the difference between Adam, Romans 5, and Christ? Yes, that's one thing. Exactly. What's another thing, though?
Obedient to the Father.
That's what I was looking for. Obedient. He was sinless by his nature, who he was. But he was obedient as the Son of Man to the will of the Father. What was Adam? Disobedient to the Father. We have that contrast, okay? That contrast is there. And like we say, the point is, he could have come off the cross, but what was he doing? He was obedient, accomplishing the will of the Father. Okay? So as we look at that, we see who. Okay, we see when. We saw what hour. And in Mark 15:31, likewise also the chief priests. Now here's the rascals. Mocking, said among themselves with the scribes, all these lawyers, he saved others, himself he cannot save. Why wouldn't he save himself? He wasn't there for himself, was he? He wasn't there for himself. Was there another way God could have dealt with this?
No.
To satisfy the payment for our sins? No. Hear Israel first. He says, verse 32, let Christ, now think about who's saying this. These rascals. Okay? Let Christ, the King of Israel, descend now from the cross. And we...
Sorry.
See, I would have not said that.
Yeah, sorry.
Let Christ, the King of Israel, descend now from the cross, that we may see and believe. And they that were crucified with him reviled him. Now that's interesting. There's two guys being crucified with him. So at this point, what's still happening with the thief on the right? He's not believing, is he?
Right.
Not at this point. And we're in the 9th hour. Talk about a deathbed conversion, right? Let's see here. Where do I want to go time-wise here? Mark 9:11. But Pilate answered them, saying, Will ye that I release unto you the King of the Jews? For he knew that the chief priests had delivered him for. And who delivered him to? I'm in Mark 15, verse 9. Mm-hmm. But Pilate answered them, saying, Will ye that I release unto you the King of the Jews? Do you want me to release him? For he knew that the chief priests had delivered him for envy. Pilate's not stupid. He could see the same secular machinations in these chief priests. He understood that. And he says, do you want me to deliver him? And what does he know? They don't. They envy him. They want the adoration and approbation and praise from the nation, they wouldn't give it to what? They wouldn't want him to have it. They're going to make him a reproach, a thing of shame. But the chief priest moved the people that he should rather release Barabbas unto them. Okay? Now, there's none to help him as comfort. So, despite the father's what? My God, why hast thou forsaken me? What's forsaken me? Exactly. Completely abandoned, completely turned from, and yet what does he do? He still looks to the Father for comfort. He knows why he's there. He didn't want to do this, but he did it as the Son of Man, who becomes a worm. Now, where the who now is the chief priests around the cross of Calvary. Who are they? Psalms 22. You got to wind down, right, Don?
What? How much time is it?
48 minutes,
You got, what's that say?
10 minutes.
Yeah, we'll wind down here. Psalms 22. Look at verse 12. The scripture is so amazing. They're perfect. That's how I think of the scriptures. I didn't used to think that way when I was a younger Christian because of all the stuff that was going on in the so-called Christian community with the textual critics, etc. But the Bible's perfect. It's perfect. The reason you can't understand stuff is because you don't think like the Lord thinks. He looks at it different. You have to learn to think the way he thinks. You got to develop the mind of Christ in you. What's that going to do when you start thinking that way? You're going to be estranged because people around you aren't going to understand you. So you're very careful as to what you say to the uninitiated, to the unsaved around you. You keep it to what? His worthiness to be believed, the gospel. What we're looking at right now. Okay? The crossword. Psalms 22. Many bulls have compassed me. Strong. I don't have time to go through.
What verse?
Oh, I'm sorry. Verse 12. I thought I said it. Many bulls in Psalms 22 have compassed me. Okay. So these bulls, okay, are what?
Around you.
They compass, circle, completely around the cross, these guys. They're always watching, these guys. And they're watching right till the end. Notice, bulls of Bashan have compassed me. Strong bulls of Bashan have beset me round. They gaped upon me with their mouths. I mean, they're looking at this and they're going, yes, yes. Envy, remember that word envy back there? Pilate knew it. He says, they gaped upon me with their mouths as a ravening and roaring lion. Now, who are the bulls of Bashan? I'm not going to go to it. I was going to go to some of it. What's that a reference to? Yeah, but more specifically, so that you can identify them, who the bulls are. What tribe went up north to Laish? Because they couldn't take their lot. Each tribe, and they're not the only tribe, but each tribe had what? An inheritance. And what were they to do? They were to kick out the inhabitants in terms of their rule in that inheritance and take the land. Did God give them the enablement to do that, trusting in him? They did. Dan couldn't do it. Why? Because they didn't trust in him. So what's Dan do? Dan goes way up north and they find this fantastic land, which later becomes the Phoenician Empire, okay? And they become wealthy. You know why? This was a rich headwater, right? You know, of all that irrigation that comes down through the nation, right? The Dead Sea, the Salt Sea, the Jordan, and other rivers associated. They're up at the headwaters of all that in a rich grassland, and the bulls there grow what? They feed, they're fat, they're prize livestock. So much so they called them the bulls of Bashan. What is Dan? Dan is the tribe that makes all the other tribes fall backward into apostasy. Those northern 10 tribes fall because of Dan. They set up a temple system up there in the north. Okay. Dan takes with them a mercenary prophet. Get this. This guy is from Bethlehem, Judah. He's a Judean and a Levite. And they steal this guy. Do you remember who they steal him from? Micah, who's got that false religious system going. Okay. When you read Judges. And they take the apostate priest. And what do they take with them? Also, from Micah's church. Idols. And they set up this false religious system in the north called Baal worship. Okay? So, when you read in Psalms 22, the people that are around, that are being identified as the bulls of Bashan, who are we talking about? The chief priests. Those chief priests are the expression of the bulls of Bashan back in Dan. And you know what a bull is? I did it one time. I was fishing, and there was like a meander in the river. And instead of walking all the way around like this, there was some fencing. This was down when I was in Bloomington. And there were cattle in there. And so I decided to walk across. What I didn't think about was the bull that was in there. And what will they do? Battle. Battle. And that's what these guys are doing, see. They determined to kill him and falsely accuse him on the basis of blasphemy. Okay, that he said he was what? God. So these chief priests are expressed as the bulls of Bashan. And Mary said something. If you'll look at verse 13, their presence is as a ravening and roaring lion. Who's identified as that? 1 Peter 5:8, because your adversary the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about seeking whom he may what?
Devour.
Those chief priests there are there to see that he's devoured. And they represent a spiritual factor in the cross of Calvary. They strike me like a flint as he hung on the cross of Calvary. So, soldiers, crowd, bulls of Bashan, and the last, and that's what we'll look at today here. If you look at verse 16, for the dogs have compassed me. Who's the dogs?
The Gentiles.
Woof, woof. The Gentiles have compassed me. The assembly of the wicked have enclosed me. Look who's at the cross. Look who's around the cross.
Everybody.
Yeah, all the players, right? That are there to do what? Reproach him. And it says, the assembly of the wicked. They're on. This is unsaved crowd here. Have enclosed me. They pierced my hands and feet. That's the dogs. That's the Romans. They're Gentiles. They're ahead of the whole mess. And he says in 16, look at verse 20, verse 21. Deliver my soul from the sword, my darling from the power of the dog. Deliver my soul from the sword, my darling from the power of the dog. Who? My, the pronoun. That's verse 19. Be not thou far from me, O Lord. O my strength, haste thee to help me. Is he stopping, asking for help in the 9th hour? He is not. We're looking at the agony of this cross work. And our Savior, in that, it's unspeakable agony. And it throbs as we look at these passages and as we read initially this morning in Psalm 69. Deliver my soul from the sword. Now the soul's where? It's a red maggot. Where is it?
No.
Hellfire. And he says, my darling. What's the Father call the Son? And the Son the Father. It's my darling. Who do you say that to?
Dear.
We think of it as most loved, yeah. Most loved, my darling. He says, from the power of the dog. Did the Father have enjoyment in this sacrifice? He did. Why? Because it was going to do what he purposed it to do. And in the person of himself, Christ as a man is suffering. This is the Godhead suffering this thing. Did they forsake him? That would be the Father and the Spirit. Did they forsake him in those 6 hours because they wanted to? No, because they had to. Because this is what happens when you talk to people. They come up with all these rationalizations to not believe in the gospel. They'll be okay if there's another way, see, to assuage the guilt that they have for a lifetime of sin, right? And wrongdoing towards others. There's another way. There isn't another way. If there was another way, Christ wouldn't have done what he did. Obedient to the Father. This thing gave pleasure to the Father. Why? Why?
To save sinners.
Because he loved, what does it say in Romans 5? He loved us. That's why. He loved us and would sacrifice himself in this horror for us. Verse 21, we'll stop here. Save me from the lion's mouth. Who's that now? Specifically, who are we talking about? The adversary. You think he's present? Oh, he's present. For thou hast heard me from the horns of the unicorn. Now, the unicorn represents what in the Bible? That is one powerful critter. They're extinct. No EPA, I guess, right? They're extinct, right? Anybody find a unicorn these days? Anybody? You think there's one still left alive on the earth? It's possible, maybe. Unicorn represents strength. That single horn is a reference to the power of God in his strength. You notice what he says here. He says, thou hast heard me from the horns of the unicorn. Did Christ have the strength in terms of his obedience to do this thing? Yeah. Did the Father hear his cries? The Father did. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? And we'll stop right there.
You should have read that. He disappeared.
It didn't disappear.
Oh, no, now you're.
Oh.